Hey friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. Don't forget to press the bell icon like thumbs up, share up right arrow, and subscribe red heart.
What started as a routine late-night interview turned into television chaos when Hugh Jackman walked out mid-show after Stephen Colbert's relentless interrogation crossed every line of professional decency. The Late Show studio buzzed with its usual pre-taping energy as Hugh Jackman settled into the guest chair, his trademark smile lighting up the stage. Fresh off promoting his latest Broadway return, the Australian actor seemed relaxed, joking with crew members and adjusting his tie while Colbert shuffled through his note cards at the desk. "We're back in 30 seconds, called out the stage. "Manager!" And Colbert glanced up with that familiar smirk that had become his signature. But there was something different in his eyes tonight, a sharpness that hadn't been there during their brief pre-show chat. The opening went smoothly enough. Colbert welcomed Jackman with his usual theatrical flair, and the audience responded with enthusiastic applause. They discussed the new Broadway production, Jackman's preparation for the role, and his decadesal-long career spanning from Wolverine to The Greatest Showman. The conversation flowed naturally with both men displaying the practiced ease of seasoned entertainers. "So, Hugh," Colbert said, leaning back in his chair about 15 minutes into the interview. "You've been pretty vocal about various social causes over the years. Climate change, Indigenous rights in Australia." He paused, shuffling his cards with deliberate slowness. "But I'm curious about something else. There's been some interesting reporting lately about your business investments." Jackman's smile flickered slightly. "Well, I try to put my money where my mouth is when it comes to causes I believe in." No, Colbert interrupted, his tone shifting from conversational to interrogative. "I'm talking about your involvement with certain mining operations in Western Australia, specifically companies that have had some questionable environmental practices." The studio fell noticeably quieter. Jackman straightened in his chair, his media-trained composure still intact, but clearly caught off guard. "Stephen, I'm not sure what you're referring to. My investments are managed through I think you know exactly what I'm referring to." Colbert pressed, pulling out a printed document and waving it slightly. "See, we did some digging. Your investment portfolio includes significant stakes in Pinnacle Resources, a company that's been accused of illegally dumping waste into Aboriginal sacred sites. That seems pretty inconsistent with your public persona, doesn't it?" The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the playful needling they expected from a late-night talk show. Jackman's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Stephen, I think there might be some misinformation here. I work with financial advisors who handle diversified portfolios, and I certainly wouldn't knowingly invest in misinformation." Colbert's voice rose slightly, and he leaned forward aggressively. "So, you're saying the Australian Financial Review got it wrong when they reported that you personally attended board meetings for Pinnacle? That you voted in favor of expanding operations despite environmental concerns?" That's not Jackman started, but Colbert was already moving to his next attack. "And what about the workers? The report mentions safety violations, underpaid Indigenous labourers." Colbert's tone grew more accusatory with each word. "Is this the kind of putting your money where your mouth is you were talking about?" Jackman's famous composure was beginning to crack. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair, and his voice carried a sharp edge when he responded, "Stephen, I came here to talk about my Broadway show, not to be ambushed with what appears to be a very selective and misleading interpretation of ambushed." Colbert laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Hugh, you're a public figure who makes millions preaching about social responsibility while allegedly profiting from the exploitation of Indigenous communities. I think the public has a right to know about the hypocrisy." The word hypocrisy hung in the air like a slap. Jackman's face flushed, and for the first time in the interview, his carefully maintained smile completely disappeared. "You want to talk about hypocrisy, Stephen? Let's talk about a host who invites guests on his show under false pretenses, then launches into character assassination based on incomplete information." Colbert's eyes gleamed. He sensed blood in the water and pressed harder. "So, you're not denying the investments? You're not denying that you've profited from? I'm denying your right to ambush me with accusations disguised as journalism." Jackman shot back, his voice rising for the first time. "This isn't an interview anymore. This is a hit job. The tension in the studio was palpable now. Camera operators exchanged glances, unsure whether to keep rolling. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what was clearly spiraling far beyond typical talk show banter. Colbert, sensing he had Jackman on the defensive, decided to twist the knife deeper. "You know what I think you? I think you've been playing a character for so long. The nice guy, the family man, the socially conscious celebrity that you've forgotten people can see through the act. Your fans deserve to know who you really are behind all that charm." That did it. Jackman's composure finally shattered completely, his face darkening with an anger that made the studio lights seem to dim around him. "You want to know who I really am?" Jackman's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. "I'm someone who spent 30 years building a career on respect and professionalism, something you clearly know nothing about." The studio fell into complete silence. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing television history or career suicide. Colbert, however, appeared energized by Jackman's reaction, like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. "There we go," Colbert said with a satisfied grin, spreading his hands theatrically. "The real Hugh Jackman. Everyone doesn't like it when someone asks the tough questions." "Tough questions?" Jackman's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Is that what you call this circus? You've done zero actual research, Stephen. Those board meetings you mentioned? I've never attended a single one because I don't sit on any boards. My investment advisor handles a diversified fund that might include hundreds of companies I've never even heard of." Colbert waved dismissively. "Details, details. The point is, you've ambushed a guest with false accusations on a national television," Jackman interrupted, his voice gaining strength and fury with each word. "You've slandered me based on what appears to be a tabloid hit piece you didn't even bother to fact-check. Oh, so now I'm the bad guy for doing my job." Colbert's tone dripped with mock innocence. "For asking a celebrity to account for where his money goes. Your job." Jackman stood up abruptly, towering over Colbert's desk. "Your job is supposed to be entertainment, not character assassination. But I guess destroying people gets better ratings than actual comedy." The audience gasped audibly. Several crew members stepped forward, clearly uncertain about whether to intervene. Colbert, rather than backing down, seemed to feed off the chaos he'd created. "Sit down, Hugh," Colbert said with condescending authority. "We're not done here." "Oh, but we are." Jackman's voice carried a finality that made everyone in the studio tense. "I've been in this business long enough to know the difference between a professional interview and a public execution. This is the latter." Colbert leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, wearing an expression of smug satisfaction. "You know what this looks like to our viewers? It looks like someone who can't handle accountability, someone who's used to softball, questions, and fawning press." "Accountability." Jackman's voice rose dangerously. "You want to talk about accountability? How about your accountability as a host? How about your responsibility to your guests and your audience not to spread unverified garbage? Everything I've said is documented. Nothing you've said is accurate." Jackman slammed his hand on Colbert's desk, causing papers to scatter, and the host to flinch slightly. "You've taken fragments of information, twisted them into accusations, and presented them as facts. That's not journalism, Stephen. That's tabloid sensationalism dressed up as late-night television." The studio erupted in murmurs from the audience. Some were clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation while others seemed riveted by the unprecedented drama unfolding before them. Camera operators continued filming, though several looked uncertain about whether they should be capturing this meltdown. Colbert, recovering from his momentary surprise at Jackman's outburst, doubled down with even more venom. "You know what I think happened here tonight? I think we pulled back the curtain on the great and powerful Hugh Jackman. And you don't like what we found underneath." "What you found underneath," Jackman said, his voice now ice-cold with controlled rage, "is a man who spent decades treating people with respect and dignity. Qualities that seem to be completely foreign to you. Respect and dignity." Colbert laughed harshly. "Is that what you call screaming at a talk show host on live television? I'm not screaming, Stephen, but I am done being your victim. Jackman straightened his jacket with deliberate precision, his movements sharp and angry. "I came here as your guest, and you've treated me like a criminal in a courtroom." The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Production assistants were whispering urgently into headsets, clearly receiving instructions from panicked producers in the control room. The audience sat in stunned silence, many looking genuinely disturbed by what they were witnessing. Colbert, perhaps sensing he'd pushed too far, but unable to stop himself, made one final devastating attack. "Maybe your fans should know that their beloved Wolverine can't handle a little heat. Maybe they should see how you really react when someone challenges the carefully crafted image you've spent millions creating." Jackman's entire body went rigid. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. And for a terrifying moment, it looked like he might actually lunge across the desk at Colbert. Instead, something even more chilling happened. Jackman's rage transformed into something cold and calculating. His voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper, but carried the weight of decades of pent-up frustration with the entertainment industry's darker side. "You know what, Stephen? You've just shown everyone exactly who you really are. Not the clever satist, not the political commentator, just a bully with a platform." Jackman's eyes never left Colbert's face. And bullies always reveal themselves eventually. Colbert's smirk faltered for the first time all evening. Perhaps he was finally recognizing that he'd crossed a line from which there might be no return, but his ego wouldn't let him back down now, not in front of the cameras, not in front of his audience. "Oh, please," Colbert scoffed, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Don't try to flip this around. You're the one having a meltdown on live television because someone asked you some hard questions." "Hard questions?" Jackman's laugh was devoid of any warmth. "You call spreading lies and ambushing your guests hard questions? I call it career suicide disguised as entertainment." The audience was completely silent now, sensing they were witnessing something that went far beyond typical television drama. Several people in the front rows looked genuinely uncomfortable, some even getting up to leave. The cameras kept rolling, but the operators looked increasingly nervous about what they were capturing. "You want to know what's really pathetic here?" Jackman continued, his voice gaining strength. "You've turned your show into a weapon. You invite people here under the pretense of promoting their work. Then you attack them with lies and half-truths for ratings. That's not comedy, Stephen. That's sociopathy." Colbert's face wrined at the accusation. "Now wait just a minute." "No, you wait." Jackman stepped closer to the desk, his presence suddenly dominating the entire stage. "I've been watching you do this to other guests for months. The subtle digs, the loaded questions, the way you twist people's words. But tonight you went too far. I went too far." Colbert's voice cracked slightly. "You're the one standing over my desk making threats." "I haven't made any threats, Stephen. I've simply told you the truth about what kind of person you've become." Jackman's words cut through the studio air like a blade. "You've forgotten that behind every celebrity you tear down for sport, there's a human being with a family, with feelings, with dignity that you seem determined to destroy." The control room was in chaos. Producers were frantically debating whether to cut to commercial, but the raw drama unfolding was unlike anything late-night television had ever seen. Social media was already exploding with clips and reactions, though most viewers couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Colbert, perhaps realizing his show was spiraling into disaster, made a desperate attempt to regain control. "Look, Hugh, maybe we both got a little heated here. Why don't we just don't?" Jackman's voice was sharp as a whip crack. "Don't you dare try to play this off as some mutual misunderstanding. You planned this attack. You researched false information specifically to humiliate me on your show. That wasn't spontaneous. That was calculated cruelty." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several audience members were now openly heading for the exits, clearly disturbed by the viciousness of what they'd witnessed. The remaining crowd sat in stunned silence, watching two powerful men destroy each other on live television. "You know what the saddest part is?" Jackman continued, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You used to be funny. You used to be someone who punched up at power, not down at anyone unlucky enough to sit in that guest chair. But success corrupted you, didn't it? Turned you into exactly the kind of person you used to mock." Colbert's face was now completely flushed. Whether from anger or embarrassment was impossible to tell. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Jackman's voice rose again, commanding the attention of everyone in the studio. I know about the other guests who've left here feeling humiliated and betrayed. I know about the complaints to the network that never go anywhere because your ratings are too good. I know about the culture of fear you've created on this show. The accusations were devastating, and Colbert seemed to shrink in his chair with each word. For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely rattled, his usual quick wit apparently deserting him entirely. That's completely unfair. Colbert stammered, but his protest sounded weak even to his own ears. Unfair? Jackman's voice carried a note of incredulous disbelief. You want to talk about unfair? Unfair is inviting someone to promote their work, then ambushing them with character assassination. Unfair is using your platform to spread unverified gossip as if it were fact. Unfair is turning your show into a gladiator arena where guests are thrown to the lions for your audience's entertainment. The metaphor struck home with devastating accuracy. Several crew members were now openly staring at Colbert with expressions ranging from disappointment to disgust. Jackman took a step back from the desk, his anger now transformed into something more powerful, complete moral authority. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone who had finally had enough of an industry that protected bullies while silencing their victims. You know what the worst part is, Stephen? Your audience deserves better. They tune in expecting comedy, expecting intelligence, expecting someone who will make them laugh about the absurdities of the world. Instead, you've given them a blood sport where you're the only one who knows the rules. The remaining audience members sat in complete silence, many nodding in agreement with Jackman's words. The spell Colbert had cast over his viewers was breaking. In real time, his carefully constructed persona crumbling under the weight of his own cruelty. Colbert made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Hugh, I think you're overreacting. This is just television. This is just television. Jackman's voice exploded with righteous fury. Just television? Stephen, you've just spent the last 20 minutes trying to destroy my reputation based on lies and you think it's just television. Tell that to my wife who's watching this at home. Tell that to my children who will see this online tomorrow. Tell that to every charity I work with that might now question their association with me because of your fabricated scandal. The personal cost of Colbert's attack was now laid bare, and even the host seemed to realize he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. His face paled as the full implications of what he'd done began to sink in. My God, Jackman continued, his voice heavy with disgust. You've weaponized entertainment. You've turned comedy into cruelty and called it progress. But you know what? I refuse to be your victim and I refuse to let you do this to anyone else. With deliberate precision, Jackman began removing his microphone, his movements sharp and final. The small clip-on device seemed to take forever to detach, the silence in the studio growing more oppressive with each passing second. Where are you going? Colbert asked weakly, his voice barely audible. I'm leaving, Jackman stated simply, dropping the microphone onto Colbert's desk with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent studio. And I'm taking my dignity with me, something you obviously lost a long time ago. The studio erupted into chaos. Audience members who had remained began applauding. Not the polite, orchestrated applause of a typical talk show, but genuine, supportive applause for someone who had finally stood up to a bully. Several crew members joined in, their faces showing relief that someone had finally said what they'd all been thinking. Colbert sat frozen in his chair, his usual quick wit completely abandoned. For the first time in years, he had no comeback, no clever quip, no way to spin what had just happened into his favor. He looked like a man who had just watched his career implode in real time. You know what, Stephen? Jackman turned back one final time, his voice now calm but carrying unmistakable finality. I actually feel sorry for you because someday you're going to look back on this moment and realize that you had a choice. You could have been remembered as someone who made people laugh, who brought joy to their lives. Instead, you'll be remembered as the host who destroyed his own legacy by forgetting that cruelty isn't comedy. Without another word, Jackman walked toward the exit, his stride confident and purposeful. The audience rose to their feet in a spontaneous standing ovation, their applause growing louder with each step he took. Several crew members openly smiled and nodded their approval as he passed. Colbert remained motionless at his desk, staring at the spot where Jackman had been standing. The reality of what had just happened and what it meant for his career was clearly beginning to register. His show, his reputation, his carefully crafted image as the clever everyman had been systematically dismantled by someone who had simply refused to be victimized. As Jackman reached the studio exit, he paused briefly and looked back at the chaos behind him. Colbert was still sitting in stunned silence. The audience was still applauding and crew members were huddled in groups, whispering urgently among themselves. The entire machine of late-night television had ground to a halt because one person had finally said, "Enough." The exit door closed behind Hugh Jackman with a definitive click, leaving Stephen Colbert alone with the wreckage of what had once been his kingdom. The standing ovation continued for several more minutes, not for the host, but for the guest who had walked away with his integrity intact. In the control room, producers scrambled to cut to commercial, but the damage was already done. Social media was exploding with support for Jackman and condemnation for Colbert. The hashtag Jackman was right was already trending worldwide. The confrontation was over, but its effects would reverberate through the entertainment industry for years to come. Stephen Colbert had learned too late that there was a difference between comedy and cruelty, and that sometimes the person you're trying to destroy has the power to destroy you instead. Hugh Jackman had walked out, but he had also walked away as the clear victor in a battle that would be remembered as the night a talk show host finally went to.
Thank you for watching my video.